Leaders from around the world convene in New York City for the UN General Assembly.
Distinguished delegates, please take your seats. The third plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order.
To discuss the biggest problems facing their governments.
I'm here to sound the alarm. The world must wake up.
Will we meet the threat of challenging climate already ravaging every part of our world?
The world has entered a period of new turbulence and transformation.
We have an awesome power to change things, and to change things for the better. We have to choose. The world has to choose what kind of awesome we're going to be.
Welcome to a special report, Bloomberg New Economy, Leading Through Recovery. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. World leaders gathered for the 76th United Nations General Assembly in New York City after going all virtual in 2020. Nations discussed and debated some of the most difficult challenges of our time: an ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, extreme weather events brought on from climate change, and growing economic inequality.
Challenges are not in short supply. Fragility, conflict, COVID-19, climate change, the list goes on.
We are on the edge of an abyss and moving in the wrong direction. Our world has never been more threatened or more divided. We face the greatest cascade of crises in our lifetimes.
In my view, how we answer these questions in this moment, whether we choose to fight for our shared future or not, will reverberate for generations yet to come. Simply put, we stand, in my view, at an inflection point in history.
We must show that we are capable of learning and maturing and finally taking responsibility for the destruction we are inflicting, not just upon our planet, but upon ourselves. It's time for humanity to grow up.
We must revitalize the economy and pursue more robust, greener, and more balanced global development.
We have brought forward from 2060 to 2050 our goal of achieving climate neutrality, net zero.
Korea will scale up its climate ODA and set up a Green New Deal Trust Fund with a view to supporting the work of Global Green Growth Institute.
China will strive to peak carbon dioxide emissions before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. China will step up support for other developing countries in developing green and low-carbon energy and will not build new coal-fired power projects abroad.
As leaders discuss curbing the environmental impact we as a civilization are having on the Earth, a devastating report by the United Nations showed that we can no longer stop global warming from intensifying, but we still have a small window to stop it from getting even worse. U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry said that China must move quickly to lower greenhouse gas emissions and turn away from coal power to limit the worst consequences of global warming. Kerry spoke with Bloomberg's David Weston.
There's been a lot of talk. What actually has gotten accomplished so far? What specifically has gotten done?
I think more countries are becoming aware they've got to step up their game before we go to Glasgow for the Conference of the Parties meeting. We also have had the United States, President Biden, put on the table a doubling of the amount of money that the United States will do in terms of the $100 billion total that has to be put together. China announced yesterday they will no longer fund coal externally in other countries. So people are taking steps. People are beginning to build some momentum, I think. The question is, will it be enough?
So as you say, President Biden doubled the commitment from the United States toward the $100 billion. Is that enough? Because I've seen some estimates that say that actually it should be more like $40 billion should be the U.S. share toward that $100 billion.
Well, they doubled the doubling, and I think everybody understands that we have a complicated Congress right now. I think it's what the market will bear, but it's also a significant increase of the United States effort. I mean, President Biden is putting more, about 11 billion plus on the table, and that's an important contribution. Other countries need to also do their part.
Beyond President Biden's commitment of $11.4 billion, you also referred to President Xi having sent a statement to the General Assembly about coal-fired plants and stopping the export of them from China. How far does that go toward what you asked for? You asked him for that, as I recall.
Yes, we've been talking about that since way back in January when I first had my first meeting. This is one of the first issues we raised, is the need to end the foreign finance of coal, the foreign investment of coal. Why? Because as of yet, there's no means of really having clean coal, and it is the creator of the greatest amount of emissions in the world, unabated, as it is in many other countries. So the last thing we needed was any country that's going out and pushing new coal-fired power plants. We have some in America still. We have some nuclear plants in America still. We have 20% of our power in Massachusetts comes from nuclear. Nobody's saying close that now, or nobody, I think, absolutely rational with respect to what the choices are. But we cannot continue to pour emissions into the atmosphere, which only heightens the level of the damage being done. The best scientists have told us we have now about 9 years within which to make the critical decisions and implement them to avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. That's what we have to do now.
That was U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry, and other leaders at the forefront of this battle spoke to Bloomberg about the impact of climate change, including Alok Sharma, COP26 President, Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
We are on the verge of a disaster, and there is a risk of a failure for the COP26. If you look at the last data that was published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it was clearly stated that things are getting worse than what it was forecasted, and that we have truly a code red in relation to climate evolution. Either countries understand that we are on the verge of a disaster and change course, many of them, others have done a lot, and we have to recognize that, or we risk to have a COP26 that fails, and we need to face a catastrophic situation in relation to climate. And I believe that this meeting is a very important meeting for a wake-up call with heads of state and government of developed countries, to make sure developed countries are able to correspond to the commitment made to provide financial and technical support to developing countries, namely the $100 billion per year that should be provided. And also the understanding that the impacts of climate change are so devastating, namely in the developing world, small island development states, African countries, but even in the United States, let's be clear, the impacts are so devastating that we need to have half of the climate finance for adaptation to build resilience of the communities, and for the moment it's only 20%. So there are clear requests to developed countries, and also let's be clear, also emerging economies need to commit to more, need to be part of the reductions program. And until now, many emerging economies have objectives that are not ambitious enough.
The American forest fires are time zones away. You have a fire recently 13 miles, 18 miles from Athens. You are living fires. You are living record of heat. What do you need from Europe? What do you need from world leaders to jumpstart the climate change debate?
First of all, this is really happening. I'm not talking about climate change. I'm not talking about the real climate crisis.
And the energy, fold it right into energy.
That is hitting especially the Mediterranean very, very hard. Now, we've put in place a very ambitious plan to decarbonize very quickly. And Europe is at the forefront of this effort. As you know, we have a commitment to be climate neutral as a continent by 2050 and to reduce our greenhouse gases by 55% by 2030. What are we doing in Greece? First of all, we're shutting down all our coal-fired electricity plants. We said we would do it by 2028. I think it will be possible to do it by 2025. So we are significantly contributing towards decarbonizing by changing our energy mix. Obviously, we're adding renewables. And in the interim, we are going to be dependent on natural gas. We're retrofitting our buildings at a very rapid pace. We are putting in place a very ambitious plan to encourage people to purchase electric vehicles. And all that is supported by European funds.
Here to talk about the most significant climate event since the 2015 Paris Agreement is the man behind all of the preparations, Alex Sharma, COP26 President designate.
Over the past year, I have spoken to well over 100 governments. I have made visits around the world, including to China. My friend John Kerry, of course, has also done the same. And I can tell you from all the conversations that I've had is that countries around the world recognize that climate change is a great leveler. It does not recognize borders, and they can see themselves what is happening in their own countries. This isn't just about something that's happening internationally. This is happening in the nations around the world. So they see the reason why we need to work together on this. When I was in China, I had a constructive but very candid set of discussions with colleagues in China, and I made the point to them that they have set out clear ambitions. President Xi Jinping has set out clear ambitions in terms of reducing the use of coal. He's set out ambitions in terms of carbon neutrality, getting to the point where they peak their carbon emissions. What we want to see are two things. One of the detailed policies that deliver on these commitments, and the second, and this is really important, are those commitments in the near term, the 2030 emission reduction targets that every G20 nation, indeed every nation in the world, needs to come forward with. But I think particularly the biggest emitters need to set those out before COP26.
Leading through recovery takes innovation while looking for solutions. Ireland's Prime Minister Michael Martin discussed how his country is dealing with climate risks with Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde.
Talk to us about net zero by 2050. Will Ireland achieve it?
Yes, and we've passed a climate law in Ireland, which sets very ambitious targets of reducing emissions by about 51% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. And that is a very strong commitment of ours across every sector. And by the end of the year, we will be publishing carbon budgets for each individual sector, from transport to agriculture and to industry. And we have to move fast as a country, and we have set very challenging targets, but we are absolutely determined with our European Union colleagues to achieve them.
Coming up, fighting the COVID-19 pandemic around the world.
What we need is a global vaccination plan. And to have a plan, we need to have leading that plan those that have power. And those that have power are the countries that produce vaccines.
That's ahead on our special report, Bloomberg New Economy, leading through recovery. Welcome back to our special report, Bloomberg New Economy, leading through recovery. The World Health Organization urged leaders attending the United Nations General Assembly to guarantee equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. The WHO said vaccinating 40% of every country's population by the end of 2021 and 70% by mid-2022 is achievable with genuine commitment to vaccine equity. Bloomberg's Tom Keene and Kaylee Lyons spoke with the president of the World Bank, David Malpass, about COVID inequality.
It's $7 a dose to get a vaccine. Why can't we vaccinate Africa?
Yeah, this is on everyone's mind, and it's frustrating. The excess in the advanced economies, I'm chair of a task force that includes IMF, WTO, and WHO. And so there are 2.4 billion excess doses in the advanced economies.
Wow.
So the goal would be to have those early doses, the early deliveries, go to developing countries that can use those particular doses. You know, it's a hard logistics problem because you've got to get the dose from the factory to a country that wants that kind of dose. So some want mRNA doses, some want AstraZeneca, some want J&J, and so on down the list. And then they sit in a warehouse and they're not applied to people. And that, I think, has to be improved. We're urging, and the task force is urging, the advanced economies to allow a swapping of doses. So if they have a delivery scheduled into their warehouses in October of this year or November of this year,
right,
allow that dose to go to a developing country person and take a later delivery schedule because you don't need it. You've got excess 2.4 billion doses.
Yeah, David, it's an excellent point. We're having a conversation now about boosters here in the U.S. when there's many people throughout the world who have yet to receive their initial dose. Do you need the Biden administration to take more leadership on that?
Hi, Kayleigh. I think the world has to come together and find solutions to this problem. And the boosters countries are going to want to do that as needed in order to protect their population. That still leaves huge amounts of excess doses, even in near-term deliveries. What we're working on right now is trying to get November and December deliveries scheduled so that the countries can prepare to deliver that kind. You need a specific kind of cold storage or trained personnel on each kind of vaccine, and we need much higher numbers of vaccinations in developing countries, and especially the poorest countries.
With the pandemic still spreading throughout the world, booster shots in wealthier nations have become a controversial topic. Ecuador President Guillermo Lasso, Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says to solve the problem, we must come together.
What we need is a global vaccination plan. And to have a plan, we need to have leading that plan those that have power. And those that have power are the countries that produce vaccines or can produce vaccines if they have licenses and technical support for that, to bring them together with international financial institutions and the World Health Organization, able to deal with the pharmaceutical industry and then solve the problems, intellectual property and others, and of course paying what is needed, because obviously the pharmaceutical industries are not philanthropic organizations, we know that. But to have a global vaccination plan, which implies doubling the production capacity, which can be done. We see AstraZeneca produced in different places. I believe even Pfizer now made an agreement with a country to produce there. So but this can be done systematically. Wherever there is a capacity to produce vaccines, vaccines should be produced. And conditions should be created for that. And doubling the production of vaccines and then having a mechanism of distribution that is equitable. That's what we need. Of course, we have all the problems that we mentioned and many others, the present situation, but these are all small aspects of a bigger one. And the bigger one is we cannot deal with this with vaccine nationalism or vaccine diplomacy, or we need to deal with this with a global vaccination plan and bring together all those that have the power to solve the problem.
But do you think there is something problematic about the booster shots that are now spreading throughout the developed world?
I'm not a technician, of course. If to have booster shots in one country means that others will not have shots, of course, this is not the best way to deal with the disease. If the booster shots are not used, and then the vaccines go to the as we have seen in many things, to the containers of garbage, then of course the problem is different. But the central question is we need a global vaccination plan. We need to double the capacity of production that exists today and to have a mechanism of equitable distribution, and those that have the power related to this need to come together.
This diplomacy started from a fundamental idea. Health has no ideology. And as soon as I won the elections, I met with the ambassadors of the U.S., China, Russia, and the European Union to address the need to obtain vaccines. And we were successful with the collaboration of the United States, China, and countries such as Spain, Canada, and even countries like Chile, with a small donation.
Unfortunately, we still have the situation that many countries do not have enough vaccines. So not all the countries are present here at the moment. And my main focus is still on the fight against the pandemic. I think we have to support all the countries in need through COVAX and other initiatives so that we are able to fight the pandemic worldwide and not only in the rich countries like the US, Europe, and some others.
Coming up, to fight the world's most urgent crisis, we must come together. But can it be done? That's ahead on our special report, Bloomberg New Economy, leading the recovery.
not seeking, say it again, we are not seeking a new Cold War or a world divided into rigid blocks.
It's not the time to blame the others. It's the time for everyone to do everything possible to assume their responsibilities.
I'm confident the United States and China can reach agreement on some tricky economic issues. We've done it previously. I'm sure we can do it now, and we've got a good team poised to have those discussions.
We're now joined by Bloomberg New Economy editorial director Andy Brown. Andy, we heard from Biden talking about we're not on the brink of this cold world, and he said, let me say it again. But many would disagree.
Well, it certainly looks as though we're on the brink of a Cold War. The sale of U.S. nuclear submarines to Australia recently, I think, demonstrates that the U.S. and China are locked in geopolitical competition right now. And I guess one of the big questions is whether or not they can transcend that competition to work together on some of these big existential issues, of which by far the most important is climate change, but also control of pandemics.
And Bloomberg will be hosting the New Economy Forum in Singapore. What's the expectation?
It's interesting that the conversations that have been swirling around New York during United Nations General Assembly Week are very similar to the kind of conversations that we're going to be having in Singapore. And fundamentally, these conversations are linked to the whole issue of a collapse in global trust as a result of the COVID pandemic. Mm-hmm. Trust is at an all-time low, and that's the implication of some of the comments that we just heard from global leaders, including the United Nations Secretary General. Trust between the developing South and the industrialized North, trust among countries, trust in global institutions, trust by populations in government to do the right thing when it comes to climate change. And, you know, one of the most dramatic, tragic manifestations of this absence of trust is the fact that, yes, we are talking about booster shots for vulnerable populations in rich countries when you have a continent the size of Africa that is still largely unvaccinated. That's the kind of gap that leads to this shredding of global trust.
An absolute deficit. And the WHO wanted to put a moratorium on boosters until there was higher numbers in these developing world. So how do we fix it?
Well, that's the topic of really, that's the theme that's going to be running through our deliberations at the Bloomberg New Economy in Singapore. And we're going to be looking at it through the prism of supply chains, technology, of global institutions, of data, the capital markets. But most importantly, to get back to this trust issue, how do we rebuild international trust? Look, you know, in the absence of trust, absolutely nothing gets done. So, you know, bringing together leaders from developing countries and developed countries to talk about this problem, to reestablish habits of cooperation, to figure out how you can get the world collaborating, uniting against climate change, that really is the essential work of our forum.
Andy Brown, thank you so much for your time. You've been watching a special report, Bloomberg New Economy, Leading Through Recovery. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern.